Coming up next on Access Framingham TV, Sierra Leone, with my guest, David Magnani. Stay tuned. Welcome to Travels with Jack. I'm your host, Jack Barron. I'd like to invite you to be a guest on our show, which is now in its third year on AFTV. Share with us your recent trip, your vacation, a cruise, maybe a day trip right here in New England. Tell us about the transportation, the flight, the hotels, the shopping, the good food you enjoyed, the people you met. Anything you'd like to share with your friends and our viewing audience. Many of my guests have never been on TV before, so don't be concerned about being my guest. Contact us here at Access Framingham Television and let us know you'd like to be a guest. You can phone AFTV at 508-875-5434, or you may send an email message to info@accessfram.tv. Our associate producer will be in touch with you to make arrangements for you to be on our show here on Access Framingham TV. Today, my guest is longtime Framingham resident David Magnani. Shortly after college, Dave joined the Peace Corps and moved to Sierra Leone on the west coast of Africa. Welcome, David. Hello, I'm Jack.
Nice to be here.
Nice to see you. Dave has lived in Framingham for almost 30 years. He's a graduate of Northeastern University in engineering, which is probably a lot of work in the Peace Corps needs an engineer, and was also a PhD candidate and graduate at UMass in Amherst, specializing in education. He is married to the lovely Nanette. He described her as lovely, and they have two sons, Matt and Mike. Currently, Dave is a consultant with education policy, which will tie into his story today visiting Sierra Leone. And this I was not familiar with, but he was a 20-year Massachusetts state senator representing Metro West. I had a problem with my telephone this week. I should have known if I knew you, I would have called you.
Absolutely.
Prior to that, Dave taught education at UMass Amherst. He was a professor and was also a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, which brings us to David's travels on a return to Sierra Leone, West Africa for a 40-year reunion. I'm just going to throw in, and hopefully Dave will tell us a little more about it, tying in with his trip to West Africa, he has been very active in international education programs, which I am very interested to hear about. But tell us a little bit about this trip, how you took it, and fill in our audience. I'll let you talk.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Jim.
Oh, my pleasure.
And to Shirley Danker for inviting me. Well, it's nice to have an opportunity to talk about this because I've really been quite honored by this opportunity. As you said, I was in the Peace Corps in 1968 to 71, 3.5 years in Sierra Leone, West Africa. And when I was there, because I had an engineering degree, I was doing science education methods for elementary and secondary school, and I was teaching physics at the university. And we worked on something called the African Primary Science Program, which was funded by USAID through Education Development Center in Newton. I worked on the Sierra Leone side developing curriculum and training teachers in science methods. And they were really ahead of their time. They were inquiry-based materials where you try to get kids to work with the materials that are locally available so you don't have to wait for science materials to come over from the United States. You use what's in your village, what's in your class. And we had one called Ask the Antlion, which was a biology unit, because these little antlions around every little hut, you know, they're there to study. So it was a wonderful opportunity experience for me. We wrote 54 of them. I wrote a couple of them myself. I did a lot of the photography for them. And it was a wonderful 3.5 years. So when I came back from Sierra Leone, thinking I would try to continue to something called the third goal for the Peace Corps, which is the first is you go and teach, the second goal is you go and learn, the third goal is to come home and teach. So what I'm doing today as part of my third goal responsibilities is to come home and teach. So during those 40 years, I was doing a lot of work for the Sierra Leoneans in various capacities, the most important of which was the blood diamonds legislation, which I helped to move forward with the help of John Kerry, who was the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. And some of you may have seen the movie Blood Diamonds. It was a very horrific movie about Sierra Leone and about the war where children's arms were being hacked off. And it was just an extraordinary, violent experience for a country where the people I loved were being murdered. And so it meant a lot to me. So we ended up getting the United States to ban the purchase of diamonds. That then resulted in England, and then eventually all of Europe, and eventually the blood diamonds dried up. The result of that was that the weapons began to dry up, and the war came to an end about 1.5 years
So because
later.
of your legislation...
Well, one factor. One factor. We had many other factors.
What happened is they didn't have the ability to sell the diamonds on the open market, couldn't get the cash to buy the weapons from Charles Taylor, who I believe is sitting in jail today.
Thank goodness.
Was selling them the weapons.
He was getting them from Gaddafi.
Really?
And
so you're telling me there's some justice at the end?
There was some real justice. Real justice.
Oh, I didn't know Gaddafi was involved
He was supplying the weapons, and Al-Qaeda was involved even back then.
So you knew of Al-Qaeda
20
years
before
ago?
That.
Really?
Well, we didn't call them Al-Qaeda, but it turns out that they were the same group of people.
Okay.
The point of it was that as a former Peace Corps volunteer and as a state senator, I was able to use that experience in something called the third goal, bringing the world back home to take action. And I've stayed connected to the Friends of Sierra Leone, which is a group of folks who served in the Peace Corps in Sierra Leone for the last 40 years, and actually 50 years. And we all decided we were going to have our annual meeting this year in Sierra Leone a year ago. And so we all went over to Sierra Leone, to Freetown. There must have been about 40 of us. And it was an extraordinary experience to go back and visit the country that I had seen.
What are some of these other people doing now? 40 years later, I'm interested.
Well, one of the people who came back became a filmmaker, and you're going to see one of the films of this trip today, became a filmmaker. Some of them have gone off to become attorneys, professors. One of them, Chris Dodd, was a Peace Corps volunteer.
Really? Okay.
And, so they're all various professions, but almost all of them are making a difference somehow in there.
So in other words, you could say with some surety that people who were kids involved in the Peace Corps continued through their adult lives having a concern for the same people they were helping as late teenagers.
I think so, Jack. In fact, it was a transformative experience for me and for many, many others. I've actually since become the national regional director for the Northeast on the board of...
You're the poster child?
The National Peace... The National Peace Corps Association, which is 200,000 returned volunteers, have formed an association. I'm on the national board. And so today what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about that trip, about going back and what I saw when I went back. And it'll start, some of the photographs that you'll see will start with me teaching when I was in West Africa, and then we will we'll shift over to a film of this reunion called Peace Corps Returns to Sierra Leone. Peace Corps Returns, and then we'll go back and talk a little bit about some of my experiences when I went back there.
As they get the photos ready to put up on the screen a little bit, tell me, you left out of Boston. Did you go out of New York? How did you get there?
Yeah, it was a real easy trip. It was Boston to Philadelphia to London to Sierra Leone.
Okay.
Just 2 airlines. I had gone back to try to get back to Sierra Leone once before, and I flew into Senegal. And the roads are not good. There's the rainy
So you
season.
were going to travel from Senegal to...
Well, we were going to travel by road, and I got to the Gambia, and then I just got to Sierra Leone, and I couldn't get back into the country because all the roads are washed up.
You mean you decided the Mass Turnpike looked better?
So yeah, it was the big dig, but it was a natural dig.
Now, here's a map of Africa, and...
Yeah, you can see Sierra Leone over there in the. It's a relatively small country. It's about, when I was there were about 2 million people. There are about 4 million now.
that is a small country.
We lost about half. I would say close to 500,000. At least, well, maybe 250,000. 200,000 people died during the war. And you can see it there, just on the west coast of Africa.
Now, was this originally a French protectorate, a French colony?
It looks like it would be by reason of the name, but it's
Yes.
not. It's a British colony.
Oh, okay.
That all area is all British and French mixed in together. They sort of traded. You take this land,
Okay.
I'll take this land. And you may know from your African history, they divided a lot of the tribes up. So there's a lot of ethnic conflict because of the
way they split it up.
The way they split it up. Yeah. So we're going to see the next. Here I am.
With the beard?
There I am and with the hair. The only thing I still have is the glasses.
Okay.
Here I'm teaching a physics class at the University of Sierra Leone,
It probably doesn't look that much different than when you were teaching at UMass.
Not much. I had a beard at UMass too. I had to shave it off to run for office. There were no senators those days that had a beard.
No, okay.
But it was a wonderful experience. This was part of the African Primary Science program that I was part of, and these folks are learning how to become science teachers.
Oh, okay. You were educating these folks to be.
Yep.
I got
To
you.
be science educators. Next, I guess. And this is my village. These two guys used to hang around all the time.
I see a third way down there.
Yeah, the one right at the bottom. They hang around my house all the time. They would do trick or treat on every single religious holiday. One day they'd be Muslim, then they'd be Jewish, then they'd be Islam. They'd be, they'd be at my house probably 7 or 8 trick or treat days a year. But it was the best time of my life, the best 3.5 years of my life, without any question.
I like that. I celebrate all the holidays as well.
There you go. Well,
especially if there's gifts involved.
Yeah, that was the whole idea. That was the whole idea.
I always tell my kids, don't forget my gift. End of Ramadan, I get
there you go.
something sweet.
So now we're going to begin to show the film. This film was a film of this trip that we took, and as we go through it, I'll tell you a little more about it. But the folks who went back with me were just. I fell back into speaking the local language within about 24 hours.
Really? That quickly?
It was remarkable. The main language of the country is called Creole. There are 13 tribes in Sierra Leone, even though there's only 3 million people. 13 tribes, 13 languages, 3 major languages. When I was there, I had to learn the 3 major tribal languages.
Now,
Creole,
let me ask you a
Temne, and
question.
Hindi.
When they run for elections,
Yeah.
do they always vote tribally, or is there some crossover?
It's a very good question. Lately, there's been more crossover, but there was a time when I was first there where mostly the Creoles were winning elections, but the local elections were almost all ethnic. If you were in the north and you were a Temne, you could run and win. If you were a Mende in the north,
forget it.
You should move.
Okay.
If you want to run for public office.
So you understood the whole thing.
Oh,
You
yeah.
said, this is South Boston.
Oh, yeah.
That guy's going to win.
Yeah, definitely regional differences. But campaigning was a little different since there was no telephone, there was no electricity, there were no roads, and there was no running water. So apart from that, it was the same.
So you really had to do face-to-face.
Oh, you did a lot of, yeah. There weren't even doors, so you didn't do door knocking, but you did go house to house.
Hut to hut.
House to house, that's right. But it was fun.
Okay, this is the start of the film.
I remember one interview in which someone offered me twice what my dad was going to make in a factory after 44 years of working there, plus they were going to offer me an MBA, and I turned it down. I said, no, I've had a better offer. And they were stunned. You don't have to go into Vietnam. You're an engineer. Why would you turn this down? Who's given you a better offer? I said, well, I've been offered $88 a month, all the rice I can eat, and outdoor plumbing. And they looked at me and I said, puzzlement, and I said, I'm going to the Peace Corps.
I said because these dots. But where is Sundays? Where is
So now your area, all my guys around. Amen to those who hate me. I love them all. The Lord on my side. It will very banging. See your philosophy, Jimbo Tech, Ashwall, movement. The red racket for best production. Man of US fame. Got you, bro. I want me off coming up, bro. You will carry your hands out next. I see you in the
I was called by the Peace Corps and indicated that I'd be going to this country called Sierra Leone. And since I speak Spanish, I assumed it was a country that I hadn't heard of in Latin America.
We crossed on the ferry in the dark, and it's best that we went at night because the sounds of Freetown were remarkable in those days. And the lights of the city, the stars, and there was a lot of drumming.
I had a little nun when I was a sophomore in high school who walked into my classroom on January 20th in 1961, and President Kennedy was about to be inaugurated. And that was when JFK uttered his famous line about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And there were many of us for whom that particular phrase really evoked a sense of pride and patriotism and a commitment to service and really a commitment to making America hold to its ideals. Only within a few months when he announced the Peace Corps, I knew at that point that I wanted to go into the Peace Corps.
When people confronted me when I got back to the States after 2 years, in 78 to 80, they'd say, oh, it's such a noble thing that you've been doing. And I always said, you know what, I just had a ball over there. I was put in a village up country, a place called Yambama. The main source of income at that time was diamond digging, and this was creating all kinds of social problems in the town. And my job was to get people to focus on health issues and community development issues. The decision by the communities was to build a number of wells in different communities. I think the number of latrines that we built was around 60. And what was more important was people were getting the concept of, what is health? How do you maintain your health? How do you stay alive a little longer? How do you feed your children? How do you get them to the clinic when there's a problem? And I think these things were the ones that were more lasting, even though they're a little less tangible to look at.
I really had never lived in a culture with cross generations before. I learned so much by hanging out with the old guys, playing mancala on the porch, drinking palm wine, sitting with the grannies. I had a wonderful granny that lived in the back of my house with 2 little ones. So I really learned the value of the extended family. That meant a lot to me, and it has really affected my life. And I went back and I lived with my grandmother and did graduate school in Kentucky very much because of that.
I learned how to tap palm wine, which is kind of a fun thing. I went to these 2 trees to tap them, and they were in a deep jungle. The small gourd that was hung to collect the wine was covered in ants. And I looked at that and I said, I'm not touching that. And I went back to town to my neighbor, an expert palm wine tapper, and I told him what was going on. And he said, oh, no problem. I'll just go and talk to them. We went to the tree, and he climbs up the tall tree, and he leans over the small tree next to it, over the gourd, and he starts talking to the ants. And all of a sudden, the ants start dropping to the ground, and the ones that were climbing up the tree have turned around and left, and in 5 minutes, all the ants are gone. He had taken some leaves and chewed up the leaves, and so while he was talking, he was spitting. So he knew the properties of this plant, that it wasn't toxic to him, and that the ants didn't like it.
This is the first approval since 1998. We provide the local materials as women. After the war, we came in and organized ourselves into groups, women's group. They elected me as a chairperson for the group.
All the village had turned out to see him. And they all had kept talking about this one woman, Mommy Bonnie, and she had such strength of character, such presence about her that I could feel. I had a $20 bill in my pocket, and no one saw, and I reached in my pocket, and I reached to her hand, and she took the $20, and I thought, this woman can do with it what she wants, and it's her money now. A couple of months later, another friend of mine came to visit. She had a letter for me. And I read the letter, and it was from the Women's Association thanking me for the contribution I had made to the women's group. And I knew then, being a mother, and she's a mother, times were hard in Sierra Leone. They were even harder then. She could have easily kept that money for her own child. No one ever would have been the wiser. Nobody had ever known, but she didn't.
We proposed to Peggy that we need hog pen. I said, why? They said, one day after 10 or 15 years, we will be getting old. Then the hard work we are undertaking in the farm, doing farm work, hiring labor, it will be too much tedious for us. So they said they will not promise, but they are going. They will go all out and see. Whatever little they will get, they will send.
I came back 3 years ago for the first time because, of course, there was this terrible war here. And I wanted to see what there was to see back in the chiefdom where I worked. And I have to say that conditions were worse in 2008 than they were in 1980 when I left. But the spirit was there, and the memories were there, and the people were hungry still to have more Peace Corps come back and help them again and start again. Very resilient spirit, I have to say. We're prepared as well, from our good fortune, to be able to help out a little bit financially. And what we have found is that when we deal person to person with very small amounts, this is a world to people. And we would prefer to do that than to go with sort of very large organizations and that approach.
My father was in the military, and that wasn't really for me, but he always told me that it's really important to give something back, to find your own way to be a patriot.
I think a lot of people didn't realize that Americans come in many different shapes and sizes and colors.
I am a Mexican American, so a lot of Sierra Leoneans see me and they wonder, we've never seen an American that looks like this with, curly hair and darker skin.
The superficial, hi, how are you relationships were easy. The harder relationships are the ones when it gets messy. When it gets messy and involved and you're in it, and you realize you have a family here. It's like the little 8-year-old girl that lives next door to me. I've known the whole time that her mother died a couple of years ago, but it just took her until my parents coming to visit to have her be willing to tell me herself. The hard parts, I think, are some of the cultural differences with being a woman and how that's perceived, and also just being far away from home.
Being here has let me know that having African descendants is pretty awesome, and I like it. So it gives me a little bit more pride.
But you really get to know yourself in Peace Corps, and I appreciate that. One of my favorite Creole sayings is, if you no know usa you dey go, if you know usa you don't come up. So if you don't know where you're going, you know where you're coming from.
Thank you, Papa, thank you. I go tell them thank you, thank you, Papa, thank you. And me God don't do am for me, yo. Like a play. Papa don't do am for me, yeah. Like a play.
What's your step down here?
Thank you, Papa, thank you.
The British didn't really enter the slave trade until much later, and yet the British ended up transporting more Africans than anybody else. The height of that period was from the late 1700s, like 1750 to 1800. That was sort of the biggest period of capture and sending Africans to the Americas.
All right.
This fortress here was their main slave capturing center where the ships were being loaded and taken to the Americas, primarily to Georgia and South Carolina, because the Africans who were being captured from this whole region, from Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, were all experts at growing rice.
One, two, three, go! Clear! Go! Push, 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 push! 1, 2, 3, go! Go! Push! Push! 1, 2, 3, go! Push! Go! 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 Push!
We have a problem because the navigator up front was not paying full attention, and we now hit shallow waters and we're stuck. For the first time in my life, I'm stuck in the Sierra Leone River.
1, 2, 3, go!
Well, some people are pulling, some people are pushing, we're doing different things, but so far so bad.
On the way back up. We're in a crisis. Let me ask the fishermen how far this tide goes down once it goes down.
We are, what's the name, Amadou, what's the name again of this?
That's Tagreen over there.
Tagreen, and then we're just before?
Straight shot past Lindy.
What?
Straight shot past Lindy. We can see the ferry.
We can see the ferry from here. And then the thought is if this tide goes down a little bit more, we may be able to walk out.
No, you won't.
No, Carl says we can't. Carl says we can't.
We can take the little boat.
The thought is that there's a little fishing boat right here. We got about 52 people that we ferry them across in that little fishing boat. One boat. Wait, one boat that holds about 20 people.
All is not lost. It's, like I said, it will be a learning experience, and I guess we can treat this as an adventure.
Julie is always telling me what to do. Sweep the yard, fetch water, go to market, look for firewood. Every day I do, and I do.
Friends of Sierra Leone and I and some folks in the media worked to create this hearing where some of the Sierra Leone students who had been amputated in the war were going back to New York to receive prosthetics. When they were coming to get them, we had them stop in Washington for this hearing. And they were there for a simple bill, and that was called the Blood Diamonds legislation, which would ban any purchase of diamonds that would be used in conflicts. The chair of the Rules Committee in the Congress, who's a very powerful congressman, and from Massachusetts, Joe Moakley, came in and he grabbed 4 of these young kids in his arms, and he's from South Boston, Irish South Boston politician. And he just looked at them all and he goes, "We'll get this bill out of this committee today." Very quickly, that bill moved through Congress. The blood diamonds trade dried up. The war ended relatively soon thereafter. That was sort of a Return Peace Corps volunteers' response to the third goal of the Peace Corps: come home and teach.
State Department wanted to appoint me as an ambassador. We really could not ask for a specific country. So I said to them, what I would really like to do is go to the most difficult, the most challenging vacancy that you're going to have available. And then they said, well, how would you like to go to Sierra Leone? And I said, absolutely. Perhaps the most important activity I had as ambassador was trying to ensure that the 2007 presidential and parliamentary elections in this country would be free and fair and clear and transparent to everyone.
We know that you're here to reconnect with the loved ones, the communities where you all served some years back. I went through Peace Corps in my primary school. I was also taught by Peace Corps in the secondary school. Peace Corps have started coming again, and they are all over the country now. We just received an additional group recently, and they are all doing very well. We are very pleased that we have had that continuity in the personal efforts of the Peace Corps in development of this country. You are all now appointed ambassadors of this country.
Very happy to see the optimism that's in the country right now. Very happy to see the direction the government's taking in. I think they're on the right track to this country's really going to develop, and I hope that I'm going to have the opportunity to be a part or play a part somewhere again in helping the country to continue to grow.
So one of the interesting things about the way my life has turned out is this contrast between being in the Peace Corps for a couple of years in a place like this, as beautiful as it is, it's a very poor place, and the challenges are of a certain category. And then going into the rest of my career, which is really an investment banking career on Wall Street. At one point, I decided I would leave the firm I was with, it was a very large American bank, and say that I was going to go into these other areas, and I wanted to do them in the grassroots. And what I wanted to do was make a bridge between finance at the lowest levels of these economies and the big capital markets. The best way to do that, the vehicle, is called microfinance. As much fun as I had at the top of finance, I had even more fun when I was dealing at this other level.
This woman worked in Magnani hospital. After the war, they come back and Sierra Leone. So when people are in Canada, they say they want to see one village in a whole district. So I have no...
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in 1985 to 1987 at Masanga Leprosy Hospital. And when I came back after the war in 2004, I was able to reunite with these two men. And one of them, John Sase, asked me if I would help him build a school in his village that had been destroyed by the war. So a couple of months later, John sent me drawings done by the children in the village. And we turned those drawings into note cards and sold them in coffee houses in Seattle. And that was how we raised the money for the first school in Maforica. This is our 15th school opening, and we are very excited to be here in Lungi today. Every school that we build, we work with communities or schools in the United States and generous donors to help fund the imported items that, like the cement and the rebar and the zinc pan, that these villagers cannot afford. And we felt very strongly that education was the way to try to make a difference.
Last year, when we were here, this woman spoke about why you needed a new school.
Mami Bogana, I was going to see a full now,
She was very eloquent, she was very clear, and she touched my heart.
And I was over here trying to teach these people something because of our way of life, but they taught me more about living and about life than probably I could ever taught them because they are such generous people. I'm an American, but in my heart sometimes I'm a Sierra Leonean, so.
When I was leaving Sierra Leone, and I remember one of my students, when he heard that I was going back to the United States, he just looked at me, and I looked into his eyes, and we didn't say anything to each other. But when I told him that I was going back to the United States, he kind of looked at me as if to say, why would you do this? Why would you leave? Why would you leave us? I felt like at that moment I was receiving a vocation that would last another 40 years to go back to the United States and do what only a returned Peace Corps volunteer could do.
Let's think about building our nation. That's the only way to every younger generation. So then we don't say we know they plan no gumption.
But that's my plan. Medical school, public health, and then I'm back to Africa.
Dave, thank you so much for that film.
the color was unbelievable. You know, I always admire the way the people dress in many of these African countries. You know, to our viewing audience, this is a little bit different than perhaps what we're used to, because this was really an educational trip for you, and so much of travel can broaden your mind and help you to see things in different lights. And I know when you look at this, you probably say to yourself, I know I made a difference to the people in Sierra Leone, but I want you to talk a little bit about the difference that it makes for all of us here in the United States when we do help people in some of these countries.
Well, one of the things that the third goal of the Peace Corps is to come home and teach, and by that it's really to help Americans understand that even though, you know, we focus on our daily lives like everyone else does, our daily lives about, you know, how the Patriots are doing, how the Red Sox are doing, and how do you pay the electric bill, there's still, all of our actions have an effect on people. And whatever we eat has an effect on people we may never see. When we drive our car, we depend on people we may never see. So more than anything, the point of this was really to help us understand that we are in a global community, and that we do things for others that we may not know about, and they do things for us that we may not know about. But the more we have these kinds of experiences, the more we begin to feel that sense of human community.
And did you get a sense, I know that these people that you visit, especially you said you went to your old village where you had been a teacher. Do you get a sense that they look at Americans as not when Richard Nixon went to South America in 1956, quote unquote, the ugly American? Do you feel that all this work and everything has made a difference, and maybe people do look at us as the generous nation that we are?
Well, it's interesting because the Chinese are there, as you know, all over the place. And the Chinese build roads, but they build roads with their own labor. We go in and we train engineers to build roads. And so the Africans begin to learn the technical skills. I think that's one of the differences between our foreign aid and Chinese foreign aid.
Chinese foreign aid very often is simply to keep their people working and getting angry at their sole government.
And what they have a lot of is labor.
Yep.
And so it's natural that that's what they would offer. One thing we don't realize is that we're taking a lot of things that we don't realize out of that country, and we're not really putting it back. I'll give you an example. When I was there, Pittsburgh Plate and Glass was taking rutile out of the mines for about half of the international market price. So they were not getting the full value. They were paying people 8 cents an hour to take, so very exploitative. But we don't know anything about it. We see glass in our automobiles, and we don't think, where did that glass come from? They have oil now. They're going to get a very small percentage of the oil. So it's up to our technical people to go in and teach them how to negotiate good contracts, how to do their own development work, how to do the extraction themselves, so that they no longer, they're the richest country in the world per capita in terms of minerals, and they're the poorest country in the world per capita in terms of income.
Really? So they have that much mineral wealth. Of course, the diamonds, which is a big part
all
of
it. Which is being taken out without really they're getting a full value from those regions.
Is there talk within the Peace Corps? Is this becoming a mission of the Peace Corps to say to people in these, I'd hate to use the word undeveloped, but let's say less sophisticated marketplaces, that, you know, part of our education of the Peace Corps is we want to teach you to be, don't everybody cry, good capitalists, and teach them that in the market system, you're selling this a little bit too cheaply, and you need to develop your business so that you are getting full value for your minerals.
Well, I think volunteers now more and more so they're getting technical people. They're getting engineers to teach people how to design and build a pump, for example, for wells, how to extract minerals in a more productive way, so that they can, but they don't have the capital. So they still have to borrow that money to buy the equipment, and then they get indebted. So it
sounds like they need some marketing people.
Well, they may need marketing people. They certainly need a lot of
prices up for the value.
This, by the way, brings me back to why I went back. The president of Sierra Leone, to ask you a question about whether they were friends with the United States, The president of Sierra Leone, as he mentioned in the film, was taught by Peace Corps volunteers and taught in secondary and primary school, and he never forgot that. And as a result, he invited the Peace Corps to come back when he became president after the war.
And welcomed us.
And welcomed them back, and wants more of them. Well, I'm now working with some of those volunteers to get some of those science materials that I worked on back into Sierra Leone. I'm working with EDC in Waltham right now to try to get those materials reprinted and reformatted and getting them back into Sierra Leone, because the war destroyed all of their schools. And now they're trying to reestablish them. And so here I am 40 years later trying to get some of these materials back.
That's all right. You still feel like the young teacher you were in that, film.
Yeah. I think if I do this more, I'll get some of the hair back.
Now this is a photo. Now this looks more like our usual beach photos we show everybody.
This is the classic sort of perception of sort of West African beach. You know, it's gorgeous. It's a paradise, right? You would want to be there on vacation. If you go to the next slide, what you'll see is it wasn't always this way. This was the beginning of the slave trade from Sierra Leone. And these are the people that were being led to Bunce Island. As you can see, even the little children were taken as slaves. We kind of want to forget this part of our history, you know, but we can't forget it. It's like, you know, when you see oppression, this kind of oppression anywhere, you don't want to ever forget it because you want to make sure it never happens again. We go to the next slide. This is the place you saw, the Bunce Island prison.
Where your boat got stuck.
Well, after we left Bunce Island, it got stuck. But yes, and this prison was very depressing. As a matter of fact, they had women and children in one part of the prison, and the guards would go and rape the women who were prisoners. And so some of the slaves that came over were part white and part black.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and it was of course they were outcasts on both sides, but it was disgusting to sort of see the way they could have their way with these women who were slaves.
Well, you know, I think even today in Africa, I'll let you tell. This is a cemetery.
Yeah, and this is a cemetery of the people who were. Kept with the soldiers who were keeping slaves had a stone wherever they died, but the slaves who died there, and there were many who died at the prison, did not have any kind of a marker for their graves.
Did they bring in religion at all into these countries during when the British were involved in the slave trade?
Well, I would say probably 2/3 of the Sierra Leoneans are Muslim.
Oh, really? Okay.
And primarily brought through the Lebanese, because the Lebanese have been there for a very, very long time.
And they were involved in the slave trade, the Arabs.
Early on. Although they came in later. The British really were the first slaveholders. But then the Lebanese stayed there.
Oh, okay.
They stayed there. They didn't go back. And so they've become part of this culture. And that's really the main. And there's also Christian, some forms of Christianity there. I don't think there are too many Catholics. There's some. Catholic Relief Service works there.
Okay.
But mostly it's a Muslim country.
Is that an issue? I know when I look at world affairs today in Nigeria, which is not that far from Sierra Leone, there are terrible atrocities going on with Muslims burning Christian churches.
Yeah.
And now I know the Christians are coming back and saying we're going to burn your mosques, and there is really a religious civil war going on today in Nigeria.
There is. Unfortunately, it's tied to their ethnic identity as well.
With the tribal.
It's a tribal connection as well as a denomination.
Talk a little bit. In your film, we had the tribal dance. I don't know if the audience understood this.
I should say something about that.
This was a circumcision dance.
There's something called the Bundu Society where the circumcisions take place when kids are in their very, very early puberty. And the dances are to really distract the kids from what's really happening.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And what's nice about what you saw the National Dance Troupe. The National Dance Troupe takes all 13 tribes and takes the dances and the food and the clothing from each of the different tribes, and they go around the country to the different parts of the country to try to expose all the various tribes of the tribes that are in the country. It's basically a way of diminishing the degree of tribal strife that's in the country. We want to take a look at that last picture, if we could, or the next picture.
Well, we got me. You know, it's interesting you mentioned they bring the food around and everything. I think one thing here in the United States that we do, I'm in the food business, and we really have a tremendous variety of international restaurants and food in this country. You know, you can go to any urban center and they've got Ethiopian food and Guatemalan food and Ecuadorian and African, you know, everything, French food, Italian. And I really think that's one thing Americans do enjoy, is that we do all seem to gravitate toward trying each other's foods.
Particularly helps having traveled. If you travel, then you want to come back and have that experience.
And I know when I go to different weddings and things with all kinds of different people, different ethnic, I love to see the special dances they may have at that wedding. And I don't dance that well, but I always like to, you know, really enjoy it. So when I see the kind of festivities you were showing in that film, it just shows you that people all over the world enjoy the same basic things, which is, you know, good food, dancing, singing, you know.
One of the things I want to just mention before we run out of time here, but it's really interesting, this notion of the, as I say, the third goal. When I was there's a picture of me later on with the president of Sierra Leone, President Karoma. You saw him speak.
Yes, in the blue suit. Yep.
And when I met him in Sierra Leone, I had brought these materials back from Newton, to look at them to see if he was interested in having them be reintroduced, and he was very excited about it. And I said, would you be interested in coming to Massachusetts to meet the only African-American governor in the United States? And Deval Patrick. And of course, he said to me, oh, you mean the governor who took his oath on the Mende Bible?
Oh,
the Mende Bible.
But he was aware of this, you're saying?
He was aware of that.
Really?
The Mende Bible was the Bible that was used on the Amistad.
Okay.
When the Amistad came over and they gave it to John Quincy Adams, who defended them and made them freemen instead of slaves, they gave him this Bible. So John Quincy Adams kept this Bible all these years, and Deval Patrick took his oath of office on the Mende Bible. The president of Sierra Leone, who himself is a Mende,
Isn't that something? And he really...
he knew about it, and he said, I would be honored. So I said, well, you're coming to the United Nations in September. Would you be interested in coming to Massachusetts? He said, absolutely. Have the governor send me an invitation. And we did. We came back, and the governor sent him an invitation. And he came, and he met the governor and the speaker and the Senate president, and we had a big party with about 300 Sierra Leoneans from Sierra Leone here in Boston.
Really wonderful.
And we had this wonderful party, and they brought all their ethnic food with them and all the ethnic dress, and the president felt like he had come home again. Never expecting in this diaspora to see 300 Sierra Leoneans in the Boston area.
We have here in Boston, we have people from, you know, everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. I meet people from, you know, I find it interesting. I always ask them, tell me something about your country. But, you know, for me, coming from Boston, whenever I am traveling Africa, Asia, India, whatever, they always say to me, Red Sox, Celtics, Patriots, not too much the Bruins, but they always know our sports
I'll tell you a little story about that. It's an absolutely true story. When I first got to the Peace Corps in 1968, I went on a trip with a friend of mine. We went up country. We went in the bush, no roads, no dirt roads, no roads at all, just a path, 8 miles into this little village with about 9 little huts. And the chief was there with his friends and his daughters and friends. We went into his hut, and in his hut was a picture of the president of Sierra Leone and John F. Kennedy.
Really?
It was extraordinary. It was an amazing experience of being in America.
America truly is. Well, here's one of your friends.
Oh yeah, these are the boats. These are all one-piece boats, all carved out of one piece of wood.
Oh really?
Yeah, incredible amount of work, but they never leaked.
Oh, so they make them.
And here we were trying to get off the sandbar. The guy who was riding the boat wouldn't listen to the fellow behind. He kept moving, and finally he found himself caught on the sandbar. So about 7 miles from the shore, and we finally had to get a motorboat to come out. And good thing we had cell phones, or we'd still be there.
You know, I was telling during our intermission, Shirley, our producer, the cell phone has really changed the world.
Absolutely.
You're in the middle of anywhere, and they're always on their cell phone. They're waiting for a call from their girlfriend, or in a lot of these countries they do their banking through the cell phone.
Oh yeah, I know we're running out of time, but the one I was just saying, the best experience for me was going back.
You with the president?
Was going back to my. Here I am with the president, and that's when I asked him if he would be willing to come to the United States, and he was thrilled. He's an extraordinary guy, and the country's being run remarkably well under his.
That's good to hear.
Given the constraints that he's under, and he's running for re-election for another 5 years, and the opposition party decided not to put a candidate up against him because they said he's doing a good job. We're going to keep him for one more term, and then we'll run somebody.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, just after the
something,
strife that they've been through.
I'm one of these people who believe America is truly an idea, and I think when you talk about people in a hut and they have a picture of John Kennedy, to me, that tells me that people all over the world who are yearning for freedom, for the ability to make your life somewhat what you dream about, that's America. Yeah. And it's so great when I hear you, say they welcome the Peace Corps, they welcome Americans, because I really do think we have to be ambassadors to the world and show them this is a system that allows the human being, the individual, to grow, prosper, and do wonderful things. And you see that wealthy banker you had on your group from Chicago, he went back and he's developing for them the microfinancing, and these are all terrific things. The Chinese don't do this. They come in, they bring 1,000 men that they want to get off the dole back in Shanghai, put them to work, and leave. They don't, though, go and tell them, you want to be a Chinese worker. Americans tell you you want to be an American. Thank you so much for coming with us today. We loved having you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.